When you're creating menu boards using PowerPoint or Photoshop or some design tool outside of the software, you'll want to save those files as JPEGs or PNGs before uploading them to the Engage PhD software. So in my example here, I'm using Google Slides, which is familiar or similar to PowerPoint, and I've created a very basic, generic breakfast menu here for our example. There's also a lunch, so I have two separate menus here. So first I want to save my breakfast menu here. So I'm going to download this as a JPEG or a PNG. I usually stick with JPEG, but either image file works. You just want to be sure that it is an image file and not a PowerPoint or PSD Photoshop file. It's got to be an image file. JPEG or PNG, so I'm going to use JPEG here for an example. And this is our breakfast menu. So I'll just call this breakfast menu for now. And we'll have to do that for both slides. So if you're using PowerPoint or Google Slides, then switch over to lunch, and then we're going to go to download and do the same. So with this one, this is going to be the lunch menu instead, if I can type. And once those are saved to your desktop or somewhere on your computer, then you can log back into the Engage software, and then we're going to head over to playlists. And from the playlists here, I have a grill playlist created here, but let's create a new one. And maybe this is our menu rotation. Let's just call it that. And then I'm going to click OK to save. And then we're going to use the Upload Media tab. And remember, if you're using landscape, you want to be sure that your workspace is 1920 1080. In this example, my sample content is actually portrait. So this is going to be 1080 by 1920. So you want to stick as close as you can to that resolution, if not exactly at that resolution, so that the content displays correctly on your screens. Because if it's a little bit smaller than this resolution, then the playlist will actually force that content to fit on the screen, full screen. So you don't want your content to get distorted, so be sure to use the correct resolution. And I will include at the bottom of this video, I'm going to include a link to our knowledge base that has a couple of PowerPoint templates that are already sized. So you feel free to download these if you're using PowerPoint. And I think you can then convert them, upload them, and convert them to Google Slides if you're using Slides. But hopefully this will be helpful in giving you that exact resolution for 1920 1080 landscape or 1080 1920 for portrait. And then from our Upload Media tab here, we can either click on the upload box or open up our folder and then drag and drop that content down into our gray upload box. In this case, I'm just going to go to the desktop and I'm just going to grab both of those JPEG menus. And once we get a green check mark, that means they're complete. We can head back over to the Assets tab, which is our storage space, and then we can locate them alphabetically. So either from the thumbnail view or from the list view, either work. So I'm going to grab it from the thumbnail view, drag and drop breakfast down in there, and then we're going to take the lunch menu and do the same. Now, once they're in the timeline, you see that they automatically saved, so they're saved in here. There's no save button or publish button. We will walk through the process of scheduling or connecting this playlist to your players, which are your screens, the hardware driving content. But first we need to set up our schedule. So let's say we have our day part. Our breakfast menu starts at maybe 6 a.m. So that's what this little properties icon does for each one of your thumbnails in the timeline here, or if you're in your text view, that also has an icon for your properties as well. So let's say breakfast starts at 6 a.m. I'm just going to use the keys on my keyboard here, and then maybe that goes till 10 o'clock a.m. So we'll click apply here. No need to worry about the seconds or the start date and time. You do have some recurring options here, so maybe this is a specific breakfast menu for a certain day of the week. You do have those options as well. So I'm going to apply those changes. and then do the same on the lunch menu. Now, it's important to remember with the playlist timeline, you have to schedule that content back to back. So when you're using the time range, it's a strict 24-hour clock. So we ended our breakfast at 10 a.m. We'll need to start our lunch at 10 a.m. as well. But maybe you're saying, maybe lunch doesn't start till 11. I have maybe an hour of downtime in between my meal periods. So what you could do, let me set up lunch here. Let's say lunch starts at 11 instead of 10. I'm just going to apply that change. So I just put 4 a.m. I want to put 4 p.m. in there. And then let's say you have an image or some sort of graphic you want to show in between your meal periods. So I'm just going to drag and drop this down into our timeline. And then once it's in there, I'm just going to move it in between. So we'll want to be sure that these are in the order, so in the order that they will display throughout the day. So let's say this little graphic pops up for an hour in between our breakfast and lunch. So we'll click on that, and then we'll just add 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And that will ensure that the strict 24-hour clock is followed. So good to keep in mind if you do have a little bit of downtime in between your meal periods and you don't want the menu to start showing, you can just add another piece of content in there to display full screen. So this menu rotation playlist is pretty much ready to go unless we had some other, dinner menu, or maybe we wanted to, schedule a different breakfast menu to start next week. That's certainly an option too. Maybe you had breakfast. We need to put it at the beginning here. But this starts next week. You have your calendar options here as well. So there's so many different scenarios, and you'll just have to kind of play around with it to get it to where you want it to be. So once the playlist is ready, the next step is using the schedule under the playlists on the navigation here. This will show us a list of our playlists first. Select our menu rotation playlist, and let's say this is on our left screen. Click Next. Schedule Now is going to download and start playing that content right away, and then the scheduled content will only show when it's supposed to. Or we can select a future date and time for when we want that to happen. So what that does is it gives you calendar pop-ups here where you can select the date and time where you want that to start. In those cases, folks will just schedule it now, and then it will follow the rules of the schedule that you set within the playlist. So one thing to keep in mind, once you have scheduled it to the players, so the players is what we refer to as the hardware side of the digital signage, so the smart display or the external media player driving content. So those are players. Once the playlist is connected to that player, then you will come into the software and you'll just go to playlist every time you need to make any changes to that particular playlist. So if you add or remove any content from the playlist, that auto-saves that action. But if you set up a schedule or modify your schedule in any way, the playlist timeline will save that, but you'll need to do the extra step of going to your players, and then over on the right-hand side of your players list, on the player that you're using, you'll want to click on the Force Update under the player action. And what that does is it sends a command to the player to write the schedule that you set in the playlist based on the day part, the time of day that you want those menus to show. So that's the only extra step that you need when you're editing your playlist timeline. If you do modify or set up a new schedule, go to the players page and then send a Force Update.